Games, board games. We might be talking about various topics, but we're not gonna shout. We'll talk about having sensitivity for culture and also history and ageism and talking about difficulty. Thank you, Layla, for joining me. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. is UK time for Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder. And it's episode 965, where it's with my very good friend, first time on the show, I believe, but we have known each other a very long time. And it's you suggested the topics of rating difficulty in games because we talk about complex games and light games, but it's more involved in that. There's different types of difficulty, but there's also ageism to discuss, and there's also cultural sensitivity. These are really big topics, but hopefully we can nail down into some of them. So thank you for joining me, Layla.
Thank you for having me, Bez, and I am really delighted to be on your show, which I wish were at 10 p.m. instead of 10 a.m. But I'm drinking my coffee from my Mr. Tickle mug, so I'm trying to
You're very
look
much not a
carefully.
morning person. So
Yes.
the fact that you're here for like it's a very big. I feel like you've done a big favor. I can
I
feel the
really
love.
wanted to be on your show, like, in the previous shows as well, but they were still early. So
I
thank
mean,
you
the
very much
whole
for
idea
appreciating.
behind it was to get me out of bed during the pandemic and to give me a reason to do something. And to be honest, there have been reasons recently when I've been a bit down, and it's been the highlights of my day. But as time goes on, I need to re engage with the world. So, episode 1000 seems like a reasonable time to say, okay, let's slow down massively. And I should start, I don't know, um, getting out, walking around the block, making sure that I do other things like getting outside because now we can just sit outside for as long as we walk in the park.
Yes,
And
yes. Yeah,
you,
I think I remember the time when you started when we were taking walks in the downhill parks and philosophizing about squirrels and things
Layla
like
was my what can you call it? Lockdown buddy. And hello, Matt, who says, good morning. I've spent most of yesterday afternoon editing our aircon chat, so I've had almost 24 hours of bez. Well, thank you for joining us on this thing. And as I like to do, I mean, this is not just getting to know you, and but for those who don't know you, Layla, how would you like to introduce yourself? I gave you some labels: sociologist, translator, researcher, and hopefully they sort of fit. You're also a metal fan. You're also a devout gamer. I didn't mention that, but how would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as a very complex person, Bez. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, as
You
you
are.
mentioned some of the labels about me. So I'm a social scientist. So I'm really interested about culture, people. Within that context, I'm quite interested in urban sociology, for example, because I'm in London now, as you put in my bio, but I always lived in big cities, so I'm interested in big city life. That's where I grew up. I'm trying to understand those dynamics. I'm trying to understand things about culture, politics, although it's not always like in our daily conversations, but I quite like, for example, avant-garde art and yeah, and also a lot of things that are not considered very conventional. So one of them is, for example, me being a battle plan fan. It's not gonna be any type of popular music anytime soon. So yay. And yeah, I'm also, because of my origins being Hungarian and Turkish, I had a side hustle as a translator slash interpreter. And regarding this, I have some very good news that I would like to share with you and the viewers potentially. That during the pandemic, when you were doing your streams, and screams, obviously, because we were all screaming, when you were doing your streams, I was translating a very, very challenging book. I don't know if you remember, probably I ranted about it a couple of times. You're on mute, so
I do remember that this was a very avant-garde book that you told me about that was spending, like, I think one entire chapter talking about something super mundane.
Yes, it's a very, very surreal and little bit apocalyptic, but also like very sarcastic and humorous. Quite interesting book. But the most interesting thing about this book is the average sentence is like 16 lines, and it's just a wall of text. So when you scroll down, there are no spaces, so you don't know which chapter you're on or which page you're on. You just like, if you close the file and you need to open, you just either remember the page number or just like go scroll down, because there is nothing
So
to.
presumably it's being released. Is that the news?
No, I just randomly heard that it is going to be released, and it has been 3 years, and it was a lot of effort, and it was like giving me a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen
It is
with
going
it.
to be released. That is fantastic.
Going to be like, I'm not gonna bet on it, but at least I heard something about it, and it's very good news.
Well,
Like,
fingers crossed, because I understand when you've worked on a project for so long, to not even have it be something that's shared with the wider world, that can be incredibly frustrating.
I mean, I'm really feeling sorry for the 3 readers that are gonna buy and read the book in advance.
Let's take a step back and talk about quickly recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. What was the last game that you played? Is there anything else that you've done in the past couple of days that you want to share with people? I was actually with a couple of lovely friends. I arranged to see Chris and McCall very briefly. It's challenging, but I got myself over there, and then we played The Crew. And I don't know if everyone out there knows The Crew. If you know trick-taking games, this is a cooperative version. I mean, it won the Kennerspiel des Jahres, I think it was. So, I mean, I'm assuming that everyone watching knows it, and it's mission-based. So we were on mission, we had completed mission 10, and then we are just doing them in order, like in a very lackadaisical, relaxed manner. And then in one sitting, we got to mission 17, and 16 was challenging, and 17 was like, okay, you do exactly the same, but with more difficulty. Now you also do these extra challenges. So we were like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. And we were hoping to finish that. But yeah, level 17 was the one that defeated us before we basically had to call it tonight. But I think The Crew, cycling back, I realized that whilst I love the idea of playing Pandemic Legacy, I love campaign games so much more, because I've got a little note that says, hey, here's where I played it, I think, with McCall and Leyla, and like, this is the level that we got to, and this is the level that I got to with just me and McCall, and this is the level that I got to me and McCall and Chris. And so, like, we've got all these games on the go, and I've done like little tally, and we can enjoy that together. And if I play it, I've got like a tally for other people who aren't Chris or McCall or Leyla. But it's like you can have all these games on the go at once and just resume, and you don't have to ruin your components, and you don't have to have this big thing of, well, if I don't finish this game with these people, this game is wasted, which is of course the big problem with legacy games. How do you feel about The Crew, having played it?
I think we played this with you and Chris and McCall as well, right?
I think that's probably true, yes.
But we didn't record it, so we're not
we
going
did.
to be. We did? Oh, really?
Well, I did. I'm like, I just wrote a tally. I just wrote a bunch of check marks to say how far we got.
Oh, cool. Then we can, I think, resume it. I quite enjoyed that game because, I'm not necessarily always a big fan of co-op games because they are sometimes very demanding. Making decisions takes long, and in my experience, whenever I played co-op games, they took very, very, very long, and around 3 a.m. in the morning we all died. So like this is pretty much
So your
my
issue with co-ops is that you don't really enjoy the conversation around it. And I mean, the nice thing about the crew is that communication is very limited. It's not solitaire by committee, which has its great place. But if you're playing the Pandemic Legacy Season 1 or Season 2, it is very much, okay, let's have the big committee meeting and let's discuss it. But in the crew, you can discuss in between levels, oh, maybe we should have done that, have a bit of a post-game analysis. But during the level, you have to shut up and just do the thing.
Yes, yeah. Basically, we just talked about that, me being a sociologist, which leads to the other topic, which I actually wanted to talk about with you. So when I go to class, we have a reading, we have a concept, we have an idea, and we discuss it. So I play board games not to discuss things, but just to sit down and do my thing. And when I have those like big discussions, it really makes me feel like I'm in class, or I am pressured to do it, like unintentionally.
You want to just be doing it yourself. You want to have your own agency. And it sounds like for you, having this discussion feels like it's removing your agency. Is that a fair analysis?
Not necessarily. I just wanna play the game. I wanna, be in the game, not in the conversation, but in the mechanics of the game. So Crew is a co-op game, but as you said, we don't really need to form a committee to discuss things, but we are in the gameplay. So I enjoyed it as a co-op game, and it was fun and engaging. And yeah, I would like to resume our game when we actually get to meet again, which leads me to the second topic, actually, that this weekend, so I didn't manage to catch up with you or a lot of people because it was Easter weekend, so a lot of people were either traveling or visiting family or just like had other plans. But as a surprise, for the first time in many weekends, it wasn't raining over the weekend, like not the whole time. So I
We had a
randomly
glorious
arranged.
Sunday.
Yeah. So I arranged to like short day trips to nearby places around London. It was very, very tiring because you needed to do a lot of walking, and it was also busy because it's like Easter weekend. A lot of people are traveling, but it was really nice to be out and about and be a little bit active and be not in my room or in my neighborhood or like in the general places, but somewhere different. It felt like very touristy, although it was just a 1 hour train ride. And on Monday, on Easter weekend, because we were very, very, very physically tired, like I couldn't move my legs, I decided it would be a very nice chill activity to get tired mentally instead of physically. So we played a 5 hour game of hegemony. And it
Oh,
was,
wow.
yeah.
I don't know that. And a quick hello to Josie. Lovely to see you. It's my friend Josie. But hegemony. Is that a deep war game? Is that like a 4X game? Is that like diplomacy? Are you backstabbing people? How does that work? How would
Not
you summarize
really.
it
It's
in
an
30 seconds?
asymmetrical game. So the only asymmetrical game, maybe you played more, but I played, and I know that you like the game, is Root. So in a way, it's similar to Root. So I think it's designed as a like 1 to 4 player game, but ideally, I think it's best plays with 4 players, and because it's asymmetrical, there is no backstabbing, but there is some kind of like player interaction depending on how the players play. That your actions affect other players, which is like fair, but I don't think there is
And
a.
what are you trying to do? Is it about tension building? Is it warring and you're attacking other people? What are you generally doing in the game?
It is a little bit like a drafting and worker placement game. So
Okay.
you draft cards that you can play each turn, and you have like a limited set amount of actions that you can perform, and obviously it's hegemony, so you're trying to gain the most power and the most money. So it's
Okay,
overall
that
quite an
sounds.
interesting game.
And would you recommend that to who would you recommend that to?
Who would I recommend that to is a very good question. I think for people who are learning it from scratch, first of all, have to be a little bit patient, because unlike in other games where the rule book is also very, very long, in this one, because it's an asymmetrical game, everybody, regardless of what they're playing, needs to pay attention to other players. So it's actually, yes, there are the general rules of the game, that what you need to do in each turn, on each turn, and how many actions you perform, etc. But also everybody, for the sake of better gameplay, has to be knowledgeable about the other players. So it really requires an amount of patience to like deal with all that information, go through it, try to digest it. And also the first gameplay, just because of this, is not probably going to be the most successful. So you're on mute, Beth.
I think that makes sense. Thank you for letting me know. I was drinking and was making noise while I was stretching, I guess. So yeah, I think that that comes with like a big caveat, and that leads into our first topic, which is about difficulty. And it's you wanted to talk about being able to communicate difficulty, and why is it a brilliant thing? Brilliant thing. It's a little thing which is brilliant. To communicate accurately, I think maybe means that people will understand if something is for them. Because when I think about difficulty, I mean, when I think about the barriers that people can face playing a game, it's not just about the cognitive load. It's obviously about the can you see this? Can you recognize the different colors? Is there a lot of memory going on? But also, are there emotional challenges? Do you have to be okay with um, winning and losing? Do you have to be okay with backstabbing other people and being backstabbed? Do you have to have some creativity? Because sometimes the creative difficulty for some people can take more energy than learning a lot of rules. For other people, it can be completely opposite. And for some people, they can learn rules, but then actually putting them out there, like doing something that makes them the center of attention, is too difficult. But for some people, it's like, yeah, sure, I'll be the center of attention, but yeah, you know what I mean? So, why is it important to communicate well? Is it just so people understand better and people can find things that they love, or is there something even more?
Yes, these are all very interesting points that you raise, because when I think about difficulty, I tend to think about some of these things. And I don't think when I see ratings of this difficulty, most of these things are necessarily concerns. Like, for example, your game Yogi, I find it extremely difficult, but nobody rates it difficult because it's very easy to learn. It's very easy to explain it to people what's going to happen. So the rating is like probably very low. I haven't checked it, but you probably
Yeah,
know.
you're talking about the weight on Board Game Geek, which is
Yes,
just a
yes.
linear thing of how difficult is this to learn. But it's a fair point. Yogi, for those who don't know, you might have one finger touching hand, one finger touching ear, one hand touching knee, two hands touching, and then you still need to draw your next card. And if you can't touch your knee with your face, then you are going to have a harder time in this game. And you need to be flexible, but also it's the emotional aspect of being willing to be silly. But for you, I guess you're talking more about the physical difficulty rather than the emotional challenge.
Yeah, so for example, what you mentioned about the forming a committee situation, like I never play werewolf because it's like it doesn't feel like a game to me. I know a lot of people enjoy that game and they have a lot of silly good fun, especially like at parties. And I feel like people wrongfully accusing me and ganging up on me is a very stressful situation. And I don't want to defend myself against these kinds of accusations. So I never played that game. It's a very difficult game for me. But when, for example, if we talk about the Board Game Geek rating, right? So this is why I came to my mind this topic. So I played this with my partner, who I obviously know, but another person that I first met in my life, because this was part of a bigger meetup and someone suggested that we should play this game. And I messaged that I looked on this, conceptually sounds like my kind of game, because like the concept of a game built on the concept of hegemony is something I would like to give it a try regardless of the dynamics. But I checked it on Board Game Geek and it was like quite a heavyweight game. So I messaged the person saying that, okay, I haven't played this game before and maybe it will be very boring or very like disenchanting for you to play with two players who don't know anything about the game. And they said that the game itself wasn't difficult. It was rated difficult because of the element of asymmetry. So when we played the game, it has a rating of 4/5. Or overnight, it increased when I checked it, by the way, to 3.96 to 4. So it changed overnight. And I'm like, oh, this must be a really, really difficult game. But to me, I can say it was a really, really easy game. Okay, it's asymmetrical. So you have to go through different rules for different players, which are kind of in a way vaguely similar, but you have to know what the other players, I mean, let's call them fractions, are. But on the other hand, it's very self-explanatory because workers are called workers, money is called money. Like, you know.
And that's an interesting point. It's like all learning, it's kind of dependent upon the learner. It's dependent upon what existing knowledge you have. Because if you are already aware of normal drafting games and worker placement, then for you playing a game that uses these features but does so in a way that is quite consistent with other games might not be that difficult to learn. Conversely, I know that for games that are intended to have mass market appeal, for example, Abandon All Artichokes, it subverts the deck building idea. But actually, typically, okay, sure, it's a deck destruction sort of because you're trying to get rid of your artichokes. But more than that, in Abandon All Artichokes, you take the card from the market and you get to do that card before you discard it. Now, in most deck building games, you take the card and you put it into your discard, and then you don't actually get to do it until you draw it. But whilst this is different and it's against the assumptions that a gamer might make, it's actually more consistent with the assumptions that a non-gamer might make. And this is really interesting because Emma Larkins discovered that most non-gamers just thought, well, I just took this card. Surely I should be able to do something with it before I discard it. And it's like, who are you aiming this at? And having the right audience who has and understanding what they are likely to know can make a fairly complex game with a lot of rules actually relatively easy to learn.
Yes, I think it was, I think your analysis is quite accurate because when you're familiar with those dynamics, like in most games, for example, I struggle with learning what everything is called. So I'm reading the rule book and it says, I don't know, move the whatever, give me a mock name to something.
Move the fakir from the graveyard to the birth pile.
Yeah, so
and what
I would assume the graveyard would look like a graveyard, like in very conventional graphic design. In different cultures, obviously, graveyards look different, but I would assume.
They just meant the discard pile in this hypothetical game.
Yeah, so like most often that's what I'm struggling with, like which bit is which, like what's on the board is doing what. And once you get the hang of it, then the dynamics in most games are usually fairly straightforward. Of course, there are difficult decisions to make because sometimes, usually, which is, I think, the nice thing in the game is that win some, lose some. So you have to make those calculations. I'm talking about worker placement games in more specifically, but in general, most games, like, okay, there might be a luck element. You have to consider like careful decisions about what to do to, depending on the game, benefit yourself best. But if it's your like take that kind of game, cause the most nuisance to the other like players. So usually there is always that element. But what I struggle with the most is like learning the terminology for the game.
I think terminology is a really interesting point, because we can look at Magic the Gathering, which even from the first iteration, the deck was called the library, and I think the discard pile, was actually called the. No, I can't remember. It's been so long now. But nowadays, anything in play is called in the battlefield, and you just have to know, if you say exile this card, it means take it out of the game. And some things like flying, it kind of makes sense. Okay, this creature has flying, it means that it can fly over the other thing. But there's so much to learn, and they keep adding new keywords. And at this point, if you open up a new set, you're kind of expected to not just understand the rules of the game, but to understand about 12 words that don't actually say what they do on the cards. You just need to remember, okay, if this has vigilance, it means that it doesn't tap when it attacks. If it like that kind of thing. And it resembles it. I mean, Plants vs. Zombies, I think, is the best example of piggybacking, because in Plants vs. Zombies, okay, the plants, they cannot move. The zombies, they are going to move very slowly. So it uses your existing knowledge, which the game assumes you have. And I think what I'm hearing is that we need to be cognizant of what knowledge our target audience might have and be empathetic towards that.
Yes, that's a very good point. I never played the Plants vs. Zombies, by the way. Also, I have to confess that I have never seen Sharknado, so maybe these are the two things.
But you would assume that in the game, if you make a plant, it's not going to move, right? And you would assume that the zombies, I know 28 days later, the zombies move very quickly, but you would assume that if there are zombies, then there's going to be a lot of them, and they're going to be very slow, right? You kind of assume that.
Okay, I have a visual. Sorry, I just saw this on my table. So I have a visual description of the combination of Plants vs. Zombies, okay? So we just found it. So I'm like doing the grand opening for you here. I don't know what you can see. But
yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this. It looks like the plants are definitely rooting.
So this is a Sainsbury's, I'm guessing it's Sainsbury's potato bag, right?
Okay.
And the plants are like, they're not rooting. They are like taking over the world. So
But we have a lot of other stuff that we wanted to talk about, and in summation, I think that all we can say is that whilst there are very different types of barriers and very different types of difficulties, we talked about the emotional, the learning, the physical dexterity, and the stress, which kind of ties into the emotional, but it's also a different aspect. Even within all of them, there's going to be nuances. For example, maybe someone can run very fast and play football well, but they can't play yogi. I don't know. Or maybe someone can understand this game with a 4.0 rating on BGG, but can't understand this other game with a 4.0 rating. And I think we've not really come to any strong conclusions about how to improve the system, but we've definitely raised the point that there is some, how can I put this, some nuance that any linear scale just doesn't have.
Yeah, maybe I think a good, not a viable, like not necessarily accurate solution. So if you add more elements to like the ratings, then again it will be difficult for the audience to understand. But I think after giving the overall rating, like when we were doing when we were playtesting with you, so give an overall score, but then something like the components, I would say it's like very similar to the Airbnb system. Like there is an overall rating. How would you rate this property? I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there are different components. So you can take a look whether the place was clean, whether the location was good, whether the host was like easy to communicate. So maybe under that rating for the people who are interested, because I would like to understand with, for example, if I'm playing with you, it's a different question. But if I'm playing with another friend, like with different requirements or different concerns, then I should be able to say, like the person that I played this game with, is that the rules are not difficult, but it's a difficult game because it's asymmetrical. Or I would be able to say, yeah, the game itself is easy, but there is a lot of terminology
But
and it's confusing. Like when I look at the
I
smaller
mean, I'm
print,
going
I
to
should be
slightly
able to
defend.
understand why it's difficult.
I want to slightly defend the BGG weight rating, though. I mean, I think that as a simple how difficult is this game to learn, it gives at least a vague idea, and then for more nuance, the people who are in a good position to give you an idea of that nuance are maybe the people who are going to then do the reviews. When you look at, the video reviews or the text reviews, and then you read it, because having all of these things, saying, hey, this is difficult because of weird terminology, and that's the key thing, or hey, this is the most difficult bits in this game. Like, you can't have these checkboxes for everything. I think that games, by their nature, they want to be diverse and they want to give you a new experience. Whereas I think that the best Airbnb place, to keep using your example, would be very similar to my ideal Airbnb place in lots of different cities. I would be quite happy if the experience was very similar. But because I'm not expecting something to give me excitement and wow, this was totally different. Whereas if in a game, I expect there to be something new, and I expect games, by their nature, almost because they are art, and art has to keep reinventing itself, and so it has to keep breaking out of any simple categorization, in a sense.
Well, okay, so introducing Airbnb and ratings to this conversation maybe was a little bit distracting because I disagree with your ideas about Airbnbs, and I have a lot of like live examples why Airbnbs can get very low ratings. What I'm suggesting is, of course, like games cannot be rated
Wait,
on the similar components. That's a good point because
I,
everything has a different dynamic. But without reading 100 reviews, I should at least be able to, like, I think Zatu Games is doing it for some games, not all games, but for some games at least. They have ratings for like interaction, replayability, component quality, and stuff like that. So for the games that it works, I think it's useful because if I want to
what
purchase a
I'm
game.
saying is that all of these are very blunt instruments, and um, can I just backtrack? Why do you where exactly do you disagree with me on Airbnb? Because all I said was that a great Airbnb thing is something that you want to, that like if the best Airbnb thing was in multiple locations, I would be happy to visit all of those best Airbnbs. I don't need them to be different. So is that the part that you disagree with?
No,
Like you feel
you
like they
said
need.
that the Airbnbs like don't give you any excitement, or the expectations are usually the same, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah,
But
I'm saying that I don't expect them to reinvent themselves. I don't expect them to be like, oh, in this room, in this Airbnb, we are going to cover all the walls with streamers. for me, I guess it would be, oh, that's interesting, but I don't know if it would make my experience better. What I'm saying is, I don't need novelty from an Airbnb. I need comfort and I need safety and I need, there's obviously if they offer extra amenities, if the shower's really great, then that's great. But like it's about the comfort and familiarity more than novelty. I don't go to an Airbnb wanting to be excited and filled with, wow, that was totally different to any Airbnb that I've ever been in before. I mean, in a sense, if it was totally different to any Airbnb I've ever been in before, I'd probably feel a bit weird and not be able to sleep very well. So it would probably end up with a low rating. But my argument is that a game, novelty is a key feature. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying, but I wouldn't pick a game, for example, on the basis of its novelty, first of all. And if you think about the concept of novelty, of course, it's something that a lot of designers are aiming at. But on the other hand, people might have like specific preferences that they only like zombie games. Then I can build a collection of zombie games. Of course, there will be like novel elements. So also like when it comes to Airbnb expectations, you mentioned comfort. Comfort means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and I, being the most uncomfortable people, like where I'm staying, like I cannot really say that I'm comfortable in my own home either. So comfort is a very personal concept, and like if I'm supposed to rate an Airbnb on the basis of comfort, it can be £1,000 a night mansion or whatever. I will still probably rate it as 1 because like I'm not comfortable there for XYZ reasons. So, and also just one specific example. We needed to find an emergency Airbnb in a town in Germany, and everywhere we looked had a rating of 1. And we needed to pick a place to stay with the rating of 1. I mean, among the rating of 1 places. So I sat down and started reading the reviews why all the places got 1. So it turned out that this was a town very popular with British tourists. And because typically in Germany you wouldn't have a kettle in your room, everybody rated all the Emmys 1 because they didn't have a kettle in the room. So they were like, this is a basic necessity, and any Airbnb which doesn't have a kettle in the room deserves a rating of 1. So
Wow. Yeah. Let's crack on because otherwise we won't have time to talk about the other bits. So, you wanted to talk about ageism and ensuring cultural and historical sensitivity. So, let's talk about the first parts about aging and where do you think ageism is inherent in games?
I did not say ageism is inherent in games. Ageism is inherent in games. Asad, we can talk about the concept of ageism and games
Okay, do you
because
think that ageism is prevalent in games or gaming culture, or do you think it's less prevalent in games than typical society?
I wouldn't compare games to typical society, but I would say inherently it is thought that this is my high level observation. I did not conduct a sociological study
Sure,
about
sure.
this, but
I'm not paying you
everybody,
to do this
so
research,
it
so
is
like
assumed
this is all good.
that it is kind of assumed that I don't even know who older people are. Okay, that's a whole topic, different topic of discussion, and what defines old and what's the age, what's the characteristics, whatever. But I just saw this post of someone posting on one of the board game groups on Facebook about their grandma playing her first game of terraforming Mars at the age of 73 and beating everybody. I never played Terraforming Mars, but I think it's considered a like difficult game along the lines of what we discussed before. So when I see new game designs or when I see game conventions, there is obviously every type of people, every age group, every gender, etc. It's usually an all-inclusive space, but usually in conversations, the concern is more about whether children can learn it, etc. You know how it goes, and the assumption is that old people don't listen to rock music and old people don't play board games. So it will reveal my age, which is not important, but a lot of people I know, they are slightly older than me, but they all have children and they are like, I don't know, like they are not young adults anymore. They are like not even considered middle aged maybe anymore. Like they are approaching being considered old people, and they all grew up playing D&D. They all grew up playing board games. So in general, you know, there is that culture that people around 60 grew up with, let's say, sci-fi and board games and I don't know, rock music. So there is this cultural shift which I'm observing, and it's also another observation that a lot of my friends' parents also like playing board games because they're not culturally used to it, and maybe it wasn't their like pastime when they were children necessarily. It's not something like they would organize their own group and sit down and I don't know, play board games on a Saturday afternoon, because that's not what they grew up with. But ideally they could be doing it, like, you know, under different socialization circumstances, they probably would be doing it.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that you see all sorts of demographics at game conventions, but having been to UK Games Expo, I do find that I'm not sure if it's entirely correct to say the majority, but there is a prevalence of a certain demographic, of a certain. I think that there's definitely. I think there's more male presenting people than there are in society. I also think that there's more sorts of mid 30s, 40s aged people than there are typically in society. The one convention I go to, Diceni in Norwich, the demographic inside is the same as on the streets, but that's only because it's free entry. And so it's run in a library and it's literally free entry. So it's kind of, to attend there, it's fairly cheap. I think I pay like £50, something like that, and I get my table and I run a bunch of games. And every time I notice that the number of wrinkly people, I'm just going to say it that way, and the number of really young people, by which I mean like 13 or younger, is so different compared to UK Games Expo, where UK Games Expo, you have to make a special trip. It's not really even in Birmingham. I mean, if you're in the centre of Birmingham, in the train station, it still takes you about 40 minutes to get to UK Games Expo. So it's not a super accessible thing. You have to be, I'm going to go there. And then, whereas Diceni, it's literally in the centre of town in Norwich. And so anyone walking past will just come in and be like, oh, what is this? And so you get all the passers-by. It's almost like more of a market vibe, you could say, because it feels like it's all the passing trade. And Cannes is similar, where if you want to go in the first like 2 hours of it being open, you have to pay. But after, I think, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, it's basically free
Okay,
entry.
so I would like to interrupt you here for a second because I think you misunderstood what I'm saying. I, first of all, began my words saying that I wouldn't compare the gaming community to the general society. So I wouldn't compare any games expo to what I can see on the street. my observation is that any games expo, regardless of statistics, would contain a bunch of children and a bunch of wrinkly people. It doesn't matter what the percentage is, but those people would be like the children, and you decided to call it's wrinkly people. So for the sake of convenience, I will continue the same terminology. But the non-wrinkly people and the wrinkly people and the mid-weighted wrinkly people would all be at least not equally, but like to some degree present at the, and of course any games expo. And of course, like when you say accessibility, no, I will call wrinkly people as smooth people. Okay, smooth people and wrinkly people. I will go with the stereotype. Anyway, well, when you look at from a point of accessibility, obviously, like if you need to pay somewhere or try to get to places and you need to pay for it, then that's a consideration of your physical ability, the time that you can spare, the money that you can spare. Of course, that's a different kind of consideration. But and of course, when you said like 30s, mid-30s, mid-40s, male represented, yes, that's the usual demographic. But what I meant was, ideally, you would see different types of people, maybe just the one, maybe just the two, but there would be at least some people there. And what I was talking about is the conversation in the general community rather than the representation of actual people at games expos. I would never travel to a games expo unless I'm like helping you or going with you or going with friends, because like, what am I going to do there? Right? I can, like, if it's raining and I don't really have anything better to do and I really would like to visit Birmingham, I would go to UK Games Expo. But for my gaming purchasing needs, I don't have that kind of capital. I don't have that kind of space. And I don't have that kind of time to play all those games. And I don't know that many people that I can ideally get together. And I mean, it's not even the amount of people. It's very difficult to organize with people to play games. So if I buy a truckload of games from UK Games Expo, they will just probably be sitting in like a
Yeah, I
corner.
mean, but then there are conventions which are more aimed at playing during that convention. For example, Aircon, I think the focus is less on purchasing and buying and more on, hey, we're going to sit down, and some people just sit down and enjoy the library and find like-minded people. So it's kind of an opportunity to be with people for 2 or 3 solid days of just playing games and nothing else.
Which is a really good thing. I haven't been to Aircon, so maybe I should go at some point. But again, it's the same thing. Like, it's a time potentially that you need to take off from other things, which is different for different people. Like,
But just because I know you don't have loads of time and we need to start wrapping up in a couple of minutes, is what you're saying that everyone exists, even though it might be in small quantities in the gaming scene, and what we need to do is change the conversation around these people, not be surprised and be like how do you want the conversation to change? That's what how would you like the conversation to change? Or what would you like to happen?
I'm not saying I mean, of course, I would like the conversation to change. It's a very long-term conversation. So obviously there are a lot of concerns about inclusivity, but I think the borders of inclusivity can be broadened, like regarding this conversation, because it's like, I have a feeling sometimes like everybody is welcome in the gaming for community except from my grandma, because like my grandma wouldn't want to play games, which is like actually a misconception. Like my parents really like to play games and they are getting quite wrinkly. So like
I mean, Alan and Charlie Paul. Alan Paul, who I have on every 2 weeks to talk about mechanisms, and they are publishing so many games, they are fairly wrinkly at this point.
yeah, so I would it was just an observation rather than like any kind of criticism or anything, that the conversation could be opened up a little bit more.
Talking about like conversations, there have been so many conversations about cultural sensitivity, about designers being aware of the history of the thing that they're doing. I mean, there are some great designers who say, okay, I'm going to make a game about this. I'm going to do research into the history. And if I'm making a game about someone else's culture, I'm going to ideally find people who might have links to that thing to talk about it, or maybe even help someone else make this game, because maybe it's not my game to make. But I mean, do you think that there's something simple that we can say, let's do this to improve the situation? And Josie says that I'll tell Alan and Charlie you said that. I mean, I don't think they'll be too upset by being called wrinkly. But yes, with cultural sensitivity, what would you like to say to people right now?
I think my point was A, related to cultural sensitivity, but also B, related to what you said. Rather than cultural sensitivity, like for example, in a game like Gemini, it's a very specific concept in sociology and there is a lot of conversation around it. So when I play a game which is like oddly specific, and it can be related to a culture, it can be like London, Amsterdam, Istanbul, I don't know, any one of these games,
Or somewhere that's not in Europe.
sorry?
Or even somewhere that's not in Europe.
No, these are the games that I know that exist. So I don't know.
Okay.
Thailand, whatever, Papua New Guinea, anything. Like when you're, I think it's a really good point that you raise, that getting in touch with people, builds cultural connection, which is really, really nice to build those connections. And getting the opinions of people who have some kind of link to that, if it's a cultural thing, obviously, like place names I'm specifically talking about, it's a really good thing for building connections. But also if it's an oddly specific type of game which relates to, I don't know, knowledge in physics or knowledge in chemistry or like a decade in history, I don't know, I think it is the same for movies. Cultural sensitivity is obviously very important, but if it's not related to culture, like I find it sometimes a little bit frustrating that there is a dynamic or there is a concept in the game which doesn't necessarily correspond to what it actually is, and I find it
So
sometimes
what I'm hearing
confusing.
is, no matter whether it's cultural or anything else, do your research and
Yes,
get
I'm
in
a
touch with
researcher, so
people.
do your research. That's
And
basically.
Josie says, I think culturally based games can age badly as modern society shifts. And that's
Yes.
true. But it can be based on this point in history. And I think as long as you're aware of that, but I think that the worst bits are, I'm going to share Tintin. Like, I love the mundane moments in Tintin where they just spend like 2 pages talking like the entire story for these 2 pages is just that it's raining, and that they're trying to pull off the roof of the car and then the sun comes out, and that's nice. But there is also this problematic thing of anyone who's not from France, or from Europe, I should say, is basically either this amazing mystic power, or they're an evil, corrupt person, and there's like, there's a problematic thing in Hergé's work, and I think that's from a point of view because Hergé never went to these places and wasn't in touch with these people. So at this point, question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. My question of the day is: do you like any somewhat abstract artists? I mean, like Picasso, Mondrian, Kandinsky. If you had to name like one painter or illustrator that you really love, who would you name? Quickly.
I would name Escher, I think. Is this within the scope of your...
Sure. That's a good one. Like all sorts of tessellation, really good, like, and weird stuff.
And so also, I will name a Hungarian artist, since we are like trying to share some information, who is, in terms of style, very similar to Escher, but I met this person in real life and went to their exhibition, which was quite nice. So has a few nice bits of art, so might be worth looking at. I just shared it in the chat.
So Steen Oroz. Okay, so I'm going to share that link to everyone else. István Oroz. Okay, so that's shared, and what's that? István Oroz. Thank you. So now at this point, over to you. What are you up to? You can share Botley if you want to. I am going to start a ridiculous amount of absurdly abstract creatures, and I'm going to draw them all today and finish them hopefully by tomorrow. This is going to be my warm-up for finishing off the categorical things finally, which I'm going to do on Saturday. That's my plan, because if I get the creatures done by tomorrow morning, then I can post it all to Jack, and Jack can sort it out, which will be good.
Sounds amazing. I would like to see some of the photos. I'm sure that you will share about the creatures. Cool. So look at these artists. They are very inspiring, and start your creatures.
So is there anything that you want to share? Please do. I promise I care. But while people think about what they are up to, I want to recap and wrap up before we finish up. So to recap, we talked about Leyla being a social scientist. We talked about the crew, co-ops, playing without talking, changing your scenery, having some day trips, having the patience to learn rules, the idea of physical difficulty, emotional difficulty, stress, and learning, and the fact that the BGG weight is just a one-dimensional thing. And maybe we need to add little check marks to say, hey, these are the key things that add difficulty. Think about the learners, have empathy. Terminology can be a key difficulty. Plants versus Zombies, that nature of piggybacking where you say a word and people make assumptions about that. If those assumptions are correct, then brilliant. Have more nuance, but if there's more nuance, then maybe it's less understandable for the people reading the ratings. Often we decided that designers might overrate novelty. We talked about Airbnb quite a bit. We talked about the 73-year-old grandma who's beating everyone at Terraforming Mars. And wrinkly people, a term that I kind of started using over the course of the past hour, are still playful and creative. Everyone exists, but in small quantities. We want to change the conversation, but that is a bigger conversation than we can have right now. Build cultural connections, make sure you get the input. And we talked briefly about Escher and István Oroz. I'll check out István Oroz. And that is my wrap up.
And the conclusion is do your research. Sorry, I needed to add this.
Okay, cool. I like it. Thank you, everyone. And do you want to say anything else before I sing the bye-bye song, Leyla?
Thank you very much for having me on your show, and I am looking forward to seeing you in real life as well. Thank you, everybody who's watching us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and I wish everybody, depending on their time zone, lovely day, lovely evening, lovely morning. But I might not be able to see the end of the bye song because I need to join my next meeting, which is work related. But I love you. I wish you all the best and good luck with your creatures.
Okay, well, I forgive you for running out. That's permissible. And bye bye, Leyla. So bye bye. And I am, as always, stuffed my beds in all the places. And bye 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone. Have a lovely day. And yeah, I like this conclusion. Always do your research. Bye, bye.